The champagne cork popped with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the crowded bar, signaling the end of a 10-year marriage. Derek Caldwell raised his glass, grinning at the woman sitting on his lap, believing he had just pulled off the heist of the century. He had hidden the assets, secured the house, and left his ex-wife Serena with nothing but a beat-up sedan and her maiden name. He thought silence was submission. He thought her trembling hands were fear. He was wrong. Derek didn't know that the man walking into the courtroom the next morning wasn't just a spectator. He was the one man who owned the very ground Derek stood on. And he was Serena's father. The fluorescent lights of the family court hallway hummed with a sickly electric buzz, a sound that seemed to vibrate against Serena's temples. She sat on the hard wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She wore a simple grey cardigan that had seen better days, and a skirt that she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. To anyone passing by, she looked exactly like what her husband Derek Caldwell said she was: plain forgettable and defeated. Inside the courtroom, Derek was adjusting his silk tie. It was a deep crimson, a power tie, as he called it. He checked his reflection in the glass partition, smoothing back his perfectly gelled hair. He looked like a man who had already won. Beside him sat his lawyer, Greg Harrison, a shark in a 3-piece suit who charged $600 an hour to destroy lives. "She's going to sign," Greg whispered, leaning in close to Derek. "She doesn't have the stomach for a fight, Derek. We crushed her on the alimony motion last month. She's out of money. She can't even afford a paralegal, let alone a countersuit." Derek smirked, glancing over his shoulder at the empty seat where Serena would soon sit. "I know she will. Serena has never fought for anything in her life. That's why I married her, and that's why I'm divorcing her. She's a doormat, Greg. A convenient, quiet doormat." Derek felt a surge of adrenaline. It wasn't just about leaving Serena. It was about keeping everything. Over the last 10 years, Derek's construction firm, Caldwell & Co., had skyrocketed in value. He had landed massive government contracts, renovated the city skyline, and amassed a fortune that he had cleverly funneled into offshore accounts and shell companies under his mother's name. On paper, Derek Caldwell was a man of modest means, struggling to keep his business afloat. In reality, he was a multimillionaire. And Serena. She knew nothing, or so he thought. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Serena walked in. She looked smaller than usual. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't look at the judge. She walked straight to the defendant's table and sat down alone. There was no lawyer beside her. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Henderson, a tired-looking man with thick spectacles, shuffled onto the bench. He looked over the paperwork with a sigh that suggested he wanted to be anywhere else but here. "Case number 49201, Caldwell versus Caldwell," the judge muttered. "I understand we have a settlement agreement on the table." Greg Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Caldwell, out of the goodness of his heart, has agreed to a one-time lump sum payment of $20,000 to Ms. Jenkins, formerly Mrs. Caldwell. In exchange, she waives all rights to spousal support, the marital home at 42 Oak Ridge Drive, and any interest in Caldwell & Co." The judge peered over his glasses at Serena. "Ms. Jenkins, do you understand what you are agreeing to? You are essentially walking away with very little from a 10-year marriage." The courtroom went silent. Derek held his breath, his eyes fixed on the back of Serena's head. "Say yes." He willed her. Just say yes and disappear." Serena stood up slowly. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "I understand, Your Honor. I just want it to be over." Derek exhaled a sound that was almost a laugh. Greg nudged him under the table. "Very well," the judge said, stamping a document. "If the parties are in agreement, I will sign the decree. The divorce is final, pending the filing of the formal judgment tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. "Thank you, Your Honor." Greg beamed. As the gavel came down with a dull thud, Derek felt a weight lift off his chest that he hadn't realized he was carrying. He had done it. He had cheated the system, cheated his wife, and walked away with the kingdom. Serena gathered her purse, a frayed canvas bag, and turned to leave. For a brief second, her eyes met Derek's. He expected to see tears. He expected to see misery. But for a fleeting moment, he saw something else. A strange, cold clarity. It wasn't anger. It was the look of someone watching a car crash from a safe distance. "Good luck, Derek," she said softly. "You'll need it more than me, sweetie." Derek sneered loud enough for his lawyer to hear. "Don't spend that 20 grand all in one place." Serena didn't respond. She simply pushed open the heavy doors and walked out into the cold November rain. Derek turned to Greg and high-fived him. "Drinks on me. The expensive stuff." "You're a free man, Derek." Greg laughed. "And a rich one." But as they packed up their briefcases, neither of them noticed the man sitting in the very back row of the gallery. He was an older gentleman, wearing a trench coat and a fedora that shadowed his eyes. He had been taking notes in a small leather-bound book. He hadn't said a word. As Derek strutted out, the old man pulled out a sleek black smartphone and dialed a number. "It's done," the man said, his voice gravelly and authoritative. He took the bait. Initiate Phase 2. The celebration was in full swing at the Obsidian, the city's most exclusive rooftop lounge. The bass of the music thumped through the floorboards, vibrating against the soles of Derek's Italian leather shoes. He was 3 scotches in, and the city lights below looked like diamonds, scattered just for him. "To freedom!" Jessica shouted, raising a flute of Cristal champagne. Jessica was everything Serena wasn't. Loud, demanding, and draped in designer labels that Derek had paid for using the company credit card expenses he had categorized as client entertainment. She tossed her blonde hair back and laughed, clinging to Derek's arm. "To freedom," Derek echoed, clinking his glass against hers. "And to Greg the magician who made it happen." Greg was sitting opposite them, looking smug. "It wasn't magic, Derek. It was strategy. We starved her out. You cut off the joint accounts 3 months ago, cancelled the credit cards, and drained the savings. She was desperate. Desperate people make bad deals." I almost felt bad for her. Jessica giggled, though her eyes glittered with malice. "Walking out of there with that ugly bag. What is she going to do now?" "Go back to waiting tables. Who cares?" Derek waved his hand dismissively. "She's the past. We are the future. Do you know what this means, Jess?" The deal with the Skyline project goes through next week. Since the divorce is finalized tomorrow morning, the profits from that deal are mine. All mine. Serena gets 0% of a $10 million contract. "You're a genius, baby," Jessica cooed, kissing his cheek. Derek felt invincible. He pulled out his phone to check his bank balance, just to admire the numbers. He navigated to his secret Cayman Islands account app, the one he accessed through a VPN. He frowned. The screen was loading slower than usual. "Bad signal?" Greg asked, noticing Derek's expression. "Yeah, must be," Derek muttered. The little spinning wheel on the screen kept turning. Finally, it popped up with a message. System maintenance. Try again later. Weird, Derek said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Tomorrow morning I go in, sign the final decree papers, and it's officially over. Then we close on the new penthouse. I can't wait to redecorate, Jessica said. That old house of yours smelled like mediocrity. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed and Derek's volume increased. He started telling stories to the table, boasting about how he had hidden the assets. See, the trick is the vintage car collection. Derek slurred slightly, leaning in as if sharing a state secret. I bought 6 vintage Porsches, but on paper I sold them to a private collector for a loss. The collector is just an LLC I own in Delaware. Serena's lawyer, well, she didn't have one, but even if she did, they never would have found it. A waiter approached the table to refill their water glasses. He was a young man with sharp features, and he lingered a moment too long near Derek. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" the waiter asked, his eyes locking onto Derek's for a split second. "Just another round of the good stuff," Derek commanded, not even looking up. As the waiter walked away, Derek felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. It was the same feeling he had when he nearly missed a step on a staircase, a phantom drop in his stomach. He shook it off. He was just drunk. He was paranoid. "I need to use the head," Derek announced, standing up a bit unsteadily. He navigated through the crowded bar to the restroom. It was empty, lined with black marble and gold fixtures. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at himself in the mirror. "You won," he told himself. "You beat the system." His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message. He dried his hands and pulled it out. The number was blocked. The message was short. "Enjoy the champagne, Mr. Caldwell. It's the last thing you'll ever own." Derek stared at the screen, his brow furrowing. "Wrong number," he muttered, thumbing the delete button. But his finger hovered. A sense of unease began to creep up his spine. He walked back out to the table, but the mood had shifted. Greg was on his phone, looking pale. Jessica was scrolling through Instagram, looking bored. "What's wrong?" Derek asked, sitting down. Greg looked up, his eyes wide. "Derek, have you checked the news?" "I'm celebrating, Greg. Why would I check the news? Check the business section. The Daily Chronicle just dropped a late-night exclusive online." Derek pulled out his phone again, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. He navigated to the news site. The headline was in bold black letters at the top of the screen. "Fraud in the Foundation is Caldwell & Co. Built on a lie." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. "What is this?" "It's an expose," Greg whispered, his voice trembling. "They have documents, Derek. Internal emails, bank transfers. They have the Cayman account numbers." "That's impossible," Derek hissed. "No one has those numbers. Only I have those numbers." "Read the byline," Greg said, pointing at the screen. Derek squinted at the small text under the headline. "Investigative report by Alexander Sterling." "Who the hell is Alexander Sterling?" Derek demanded. "I don't know," Greg said, sweating now. "But look at the bottom of the article. It says, 'Sources provided by the Office of the Special Auditor.'" "I don't have a special auditor," Derek shouted, drawing stares from nearby tables. "You do now," a deep voice said from behind him. Derek spun around in his chair. Standing there was the man from the back of the courtroom, the one in the trench coat. He wasn't wearing the coat anymore. He was wearing a tuxedo, and he looked entirely at home in the expensive lounge. But his eyes were cold, hard flint. "Who are you?" Derek demanded, standing up to assert dominance, though his legs felt like jelly. The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm the man who's going to make sure you enjoy your last night of freedom, Mr. Caldwell. My name is Arthur Sterling. You might know my daughter." Derek blinked, confused. "I don't know any Sterlings." Arthur Sterling took a step closer, his presence looming large. "Oh, I think you do. She goes by her mother's maiden name, usually. Jenkins. Serena Jenkins." The glass of champagne slipped from Derek's hand. It hit the floor, and shattered shards of crystal exploding across the polished wood. "Serena," Derek whispered. "Serena is your daughter." "She is," Arthur said calmly, "and she sends her regards. See you in court tomorrow, Derek. And I don't mean family court." Arthur turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as effortlessly as spoke. Derek stood, frozen, the music around him warping into a chaotic noise. Jessica was tugging at his sleeve, asking about the broken glass, but Derek couldn't hear her. Serena Jenkins, the waitress he met at a diner, the woman who bought clothes at thrift stores, the woman who drove a 2012 Honda Civic. Arthur Sterling. The Arthur Sterling. The billionaire industrialist who owned Sterling Global, the parent company of the bank. Derek used the insurance firm Derek used, and God help him, the construction conglomerate that Derek had been trying to get a contract with for 5 years. Derek looked at Greg. Greg looked like he was going to be sick. "We have to go," Greg stammered. "We have to fix this." "There is no fixing this." Derek realized the horror finally setting in. "She played me. For 10 years. She played me." But Derek was wrong again. Serena hadn't played him for 10 years. She had loved him for 10 years. She had only started playing him the moment he decided to destroy her. And unlike Derek, the Sterlings didn't play for money. They played for blood. The ride from the Obsidian to the headquarters of Caldwell & Co. was a blur of neon lights and panic. Derek drove his Aston Martin like a maniac, swerving through the late-night traffic, his hands slick with sweat on the leather steering wheel. Beside him, Greg was frantically typing on his laptop, the blue light illuminating his pale, terrified face. "Access denied," Greg cursed, slamming the Enter key hard enough to crack the plastic. "I can't get into the server, Derek. I'm trying to remote in to scrub the emails about the Cayman transfers, but I'm locked out. Administrator privileges revoked." "That's impossible," Derek roared, running a red light. "I am the administrator. I built that system." "Well, someone with a higher clearance just locked the gate," Greg shot back. "Arthur Sterling owns the company that built the servers, Derek. Did you forget that Cyberdyne Solutions is a Sterling subsidiary? If he wants into your digital life, he doesn't need a hacker. He just needs a password." Derek slammed the brakes as they screeched into the parking lot of his office building. It was a sleek 3-story glass structure that Derek had designed himself a monument to his own ego. But tonight it looked like a prison. There were lights on the second floor. His office. "Who's up there?" Derek hissed, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Security," Greg suggested hopefully. "Security doesn't have the code to the executive suite." Derek sprinted to the front doors, jamming his keycard against the reader. The light flashed red. Access denied. He tried again. Red. He pounded on the glass. Inside the night security guard, a man named Jerry, who Derek had underpaid for 5 years, looked up from his desk. Jerry didn't rush to open the door. He slowly stood up, walked over, and held up a piece of paper against the glass. It was a printed email. The header read, "Notice of Asset Freeze. Department of Justice." Derek recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "Jerry, open the damn door. I own this building." Jerry just shook his head, a look of grim satisfaction on his face, and walked back to his desk. Derek slumped against the cold glass, sliding down until he hit the concrete. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a crushing nausea. His mind drifted back 10 years to a rainy Tuesday in a diner off the interstate. That was where he met Serena. She had been 22, wearing a stained apron, her hair frizzy from the humidity. She had spilled coffee on his table and apologized profusely, her hands shaking. Derek, fresh off his first big contract, had felt like a king. He had graciously told her not to worry about it. He left a $100 tip not because he was kind, but because he wanted to see her eyes widen. He wanted to feel like a savior. He courted her with the confidence of a man buying a used car. He dazzled her with dinners she couldn't afford, gifts she didn't ask for. She was quiet, simple, and seemingly without a past. She told him her parents were out of the picture, and that she wanted a simple life. "I don't care about money, Derek," she had told him on their second date. "I just want a home where there are no lies. My family." We had too many lies. He had laughed internally. Everyone cares about money, he had thought. You just don't have any. He married her because she was safe. She didn't ask questions about his business. She signed the tax returns without reading them. She was the perfect cover for a man building an empire on cut corners and kickbacks. She played the long game, Derek whispered to the empty parking lot. 10 years. She waited 10 years. Greg was standing over him, phone to his ear. "Derek, get up. My contacts at the bank just called me back. It's worse than we thought." Derek looked up, his eyes hollow. "How much worse? Your personal accounts are frozen, the business accounts are frozen, and Derek, the Skyline project contract. The one you were banking on. What about it? The client just invoked the morality clause and terminated the deal effective immediately. They're suing for breach of contract. They're citing the fraud investigation." "Who is the client?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. "The holding company is Aurora Trust," Greg said, his voice shaking. "I just looked up the board of directors. The chairwoman is Serena Jenkins." Derek put his head in his hands. Serena wasn't just the daughter of a billionaire. She was a businesswoman. While Derek was playing checkers, hiding Porsches and skimming off the top, Serena had been sitting on the board of the very companies he was desperate to impress. She had signed off on his contracts. She had watched him inflate his invoices. She had let him dig his own grave, shovelful by shovelful. "We have to go to court tomorrow," Greg said, his voice sounding like a death sentence. "If we don't show up, they'll issue a warrant for your arrest." "I can't face her," Derek said. "Not like this." "You don't have a choice." Greg pulled him up. "Go home, shower, wear your best suit. We're going to deny everything. It's our only play. We claim the evidence is fabricated. We claim it's a vindictive father trying to ruin you." It was a weak plan. It was a desperate plan. But as the first light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, it was the only plan they had. The atmosphere in the courtroom the next morning was radically different. The day before, it had been a mundane administrative procedure, a bored judge, a quiet wife, an arrogant husband. Today the air was thick enough to choke on. The gallery was full. Not with press, Arthur Sterling was too powerful to let the paparazzi into a family court, but with suits. Serious men and women in dark blue and charcoal grey, tapping on tablets, whispering in hushed tones. They were the legal team of Sterling Global. When Derek walked in, he felt small. He was wearing his expensive suit, but it felt like a costume. Greg walked beside him, but the shark-like confidence was gone. Greg looked like a fish that had just realized it was in a tank with piranhas. "All rise." Judge Henderson entered, but even he looked different. He sat straighter. He checked his robe. He looked nervous. "Case number 49201, Caldwell versus Caldwell," the judge announced. "We are here for the entry of the final judgment." "Actually, Your Honor," a voice boomed from the back. "We are not." The doors swung open. Serena walked in. Derek's breath hitched. The woman he had divorced yesterday, the woman in the thrift store cardigan, was gone. In her place was a woman who radiated power. She wore a cream-colored power suit that cost more than Derek's car. Her hair was sleek, sharp, and professional. She wore no jewelry except for a simple diamond pin on her lapel, the crest of the Sterling family. Flanking her were two men. On her left was her father, Arthur Sterling, looking like a titan of industry. On her right was a man Derek recognized from the covers of legal magazines, Julian Croft. The smiling cobra, the most expensive, ruthless litigator on the East Coast. They walked to the plaintiff's table. Serena didn't even look at Derek. She sat down, opened a leather folio, and uncapped a fountain pen. "Mr. Croft," Judge Henderson nodded respectfully. "I see you have filed an emergency motion to intervene." "I have your honor," Julian Croft said, his voice smooth as velvet. "And a motion to vacate the settlement agreement signed yesterday on the grounds of gross fraud, perjury, and RICO violations." "Objection," Greg squeaked, standing up. This is ambush. We have a signed agreement, Ms. Jenkins agreed to the $20,000. Julian Croft turned slowly to face Greg. He smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "Ms. Jenkins agreed to a settlement based on the financial disclosures provided by your client, Mr. Harrison," Croft said. "Those disclosures stated that Mr. Caldwell's total assets were valued at $300,000. However," Croft lifted a stack of documents 3 inches thick and dropped them on the table. The thud echoed through the room. "We have uncovered evidence that Mr. Caldwell's actual net worth is in excess of $14 million. Assets he concealed through a network of shell companies in Delaware, the Cayman Islands, and wait for it, a crypto wallet registered in his mistress's name." A gasp went through the gallery. Derek froze. He hadn't told Greg about the crypto. Greg turned to Derek, his face turning purple. "You put it in Jessica's name, you idiot." "I didn't think they'd find it," Derek hissed. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. "Is this true? Did you sign a sworn affidavit of financial assets yesterday, knowing it was false?" Derek stood up, his legs shaking. "Your Honor, it's a misunderstanding. These are complex business structures. My wife, Serena, she wouldn't understand the nuances of construction finance." Serena stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply turned to the judge. "Your Honor," Serena said, her voice clear and commanding. "I have a master's in international finance from Wharton. I understand the nuances perfectly." Derek's jaw dropped. "Wharton, you told me you went to community college." "I told you I took classes," Serena corrected him coldly, finally looking him in the eye. "I never said where. You never asked. You were too busy talking about yourself." She stepped out from behind the table. "For 10 years I tried to be the wife you needed. I hid who I was, because I wanted to be sure you loved me, not my father's checkbook. And when I realized you were stealing not just from the company, but from us, I gave you a chance. Yesterday. I gave you one last chance to be honest. If you had told the truth about the assets, if you had offered a fair split, I would have let you go. I would have walked away." She took a step closer to the railing. "But you tried to leave me with nothing. You mocked me. You laughed at me with your lawyer. You mistook my silence for weakness. That was your last mistake." Julian Croft handed a document to the bailiff. "Your Honor, we are not just asking to vacate the settlement. We are filing a countersuit for 100% of the marital assets due to fraudulent concealment. Furthermore, we have a warrant here issued by the District Attorney's Office regarding the embezzlement of funds from the Skyline project." The judge looked at the warrant. He looked at Derek. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "I am freezing all assets immediately, and I believe there are officers at the back of the courtroom waiting to speak with you." Derek spun around. 2 uniformed officers were standing by the doors, handcuffs visible on their belts. "No," Derek stammered. "Greg, do something." Greg Harrison began packing his briefcase with incredible speed. "I can't represent you in a criminal case, Derek. That's outside my retainer. You're on your own." "You coward!" Derek screamed. "Mr. Caldwell, sit down," the judge bellowed. "No!" Derek shouted, his composure shattering. He pointed a shaking finger at Serena. "You tricked me. You entrapped me. This is illegal. You can't do this." Arthur Sterling stood up then. He didn't shout. He just placed a hand on Serena's shoulder. "We aren't doing anything, Derek," Arthur said. "You did this to yourself. We're just turning on the lights." Serena looked at Derek one last time. There was no love left in her eyes. Only pity. "Goodbye, Derek," she said. As the officers moved in to take Derek into custody, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He wasn't going to the penthouse. He wasn't going to the club. He was going to a holding cell. But the worst part wasn't the jail time. It wasn't the loss of the money. It was the realization that he had been living with a queen for 10 years, treating her like a servant, and he had been too blind to see the crown until she used it to crush him. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Derek looked at the gallery. Jessica was there. She had snuck in at the back. As their eyes met, she didn't look sympathetic. She was typing on her phone, likely trying to access the crypto wallet before the authorities did. He was truly alone. The holding cell at the county jail smelled of bleach and old sweat. Derek sat on the metal cot, his expensive suit wrinkled and stripped of his tie and shoelaces. He had been staring at the concrete wall for 4 hours. "This is a mistake," he kept muttering. "Just a scare tactic. Arthur Sterling is flexing his muscles. I'll be out by dinner." When the guard finally banged on the bars, Derek jumped. "Caldwell, you get 1 phone call. Make it count." Derek scrambled to the wall-mounted phone. His hands shook as he dialed Jessica's number. She was his partner. She was holding the crypto keys. She could bail him out. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hello." Her voice was tight-guarded. "Jess." "Thank God." Derek breathed, pressing his forehead against the cold metal box. "Listen, you need to call a bail bondsman. Get the cash from the safe in the condo. The combination is 4920. Get me out of here and we'll run. We'll go to Cabo tonight." There was a long silence on the other end. Then he heard the distinct sound of a zipper closing. "I can't do that, Derek," she said. "What do you mean you can't?" "Just open the safe. The safe is empty, Derek. I took the cash an hour ago." Derek blinked. Okay, that's fine. You have the money. Just come get me." "I'm not coming," Jessica said, her voice turning icy. "I'm at the district attorney's office." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. "Why are you at the DA's office?" Because they offered me immunity, Jessica replied smoothly. They know about the Cayman accounts, Derek. They know about the money laundering through the shell companies. They told me I could either be your co-conspirator and do 15 years, or I could be a witness and walk away with probation. You traitor! Derek screamed into the receiver. I bought you everything, that penthouse, the car, the jewelry, and they're seizing all of it. Jessica snapped. You're broke, Derek. You're toxic. And honestly, you were never that smart. Serena played you for a fool, and I'm not going down with a sinking ship. I just handed over the ledger you kept in the bedside drawer. Good luck, honey. The line went dead. Derek dropped the receiver, letting it dangle by its metal cord. He slid down the wall, hitting the floor with a thud. An hour later, the heavy door buzzed open again. But it wasn't a high-priced lawyer who walked in. It was a disheveled man in a cheap, ill-fitting brown suit carrying a battered briefcase. He looked exhausted. Derek Caldwell. The man sighed, sitting on the metal stool opposite the cell. I'm Leonard Smalls. I'm your court-appointed public defender. I don't need a public defender. Derek spat, scrambling up. I have a lawyer, Greg Harrison. Leonard chuckled humorlessly, opening a file. Greg Harrison. Yeah, he's currently in an interrogation room 3 doors down. He's trying to cut a deal to keep his law license. He claims he had no knowledge of your illegal activities and that you duped him. He's throwing you under the bus, Mr. Caldwell. Everyone is. Derek stared at Leonard, his mouth agape. So, I have no one. You have me, Leonard said, pulling out a notepad. And considering the stack of evidence the Sterlings just dropped on the prosecutor's desk, emails, bank transfers, wiretaps, you better start listening to me. They aren't just going for fraud. They're adding embezzlement, tax evasion, and conspiracy. You're looking at 20 years minimum. 20 years, Derek whispered. Unless... Leonard leaned in. You plead guilty today. If you plead out, save the state the cost of a trial, maybe, just maybe, we can get it down to 10. I want a trial, Derek said, his pride flaring up one last time, a desperate ember in the ashes. Serena won't testify. She's too soft. She won't want the publicity. If I fight, she'll crack. Leonard looked at him with pity. You really don't know your wife at all, do you? 6 months later, the courtroom was packed. This wasn't family court anymore. This was the federal district court. The cameras were lined up outside, and the gallery was filled with reporters, former business associates, and curious onlookers hungry for the fall of the construction conman. Derek sat at the defense table. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair was thinning, and his skin was sallow from months of prison food and sleepless nights. He wore a suit Leonard had found for him. It was a size too big. Prosecutor Holloway, a sharp woman with a reputation for destroying white-collar criminals, stood up. The people call Serena Sterling to the stand. A murmur went through the crowd as Serena entered. She was breathtaking. She wore a navy blue dress that commanded respect, her posture perfect. She didn't look at the cameras. She walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Ms. Sterling, Holloway began, can you tell the court when you first realized your husband was defrauding his investors? Approximately 14 months ago, Serena said, her voice clear and melodic. And why didn't you leave him then? Holloway asked. Why wait? Serena turned her head and looked directly at Derek. For the first time in 6 months, their eyes locked. Derek expected hate. He expected anger. But he saw only a clinical detachment. He was a bug under a microscope. Because leaving him wasn't enough, Serena said. Derek Caldwell is a predator. He preys on those he thinks are weak. He preyed on his subcontractors, stiffing them on payments. He preyed on his elderly investors. And he thought he was preying on me. If I had simply divorced him, he would have hidden the money and started over. He would have found another victim. She paused, taking a sip of water. My father taught me that when you find a rot in the foundation, you don't just paint over it. You tear it out. So I stayed. I played the role of the oblivious housewife. I let him think he was a genius. I collected his passwords. I copied his hard drives. I recorded his conversations with his mistress. Derek flinched. The gallery whispered excitedly. I gathered every receipt, every lie, and every stolen dollar. Serena continued, her voice rising slightly. I built a cage around him, bar by bar, document by document, and I waited for him to lock himself inside. And the settlement agreement? Holloway asked. The one where he offered you $20,000. That was the final test, Serena said. I wanted to see if there was a shred of humanity left in him. If he had offered a fair split, if he had shown even a moment of remorse or fairness, I might have shown mercy. But he didn't. He tried to leave me destitute. He celebrated it. Derek couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his hand on the table, standing up. You lied to me, he shouted, his voice cracking. You lied about who you were. You're the fraud. You pretended to be poor. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Thompson barked. Serena didn't flinch. She just tilted her head. I never said I was poor, Derek. I said I wanted a simple life. You assumed I was poor because you judge people's value by the clothes they wear. You never saw me. You only saw what you could take from me. Derek was pulled back into his chair by Leonard. He slumped forward, defeated. The truth rang in the air like a bell. He had dug his own grave with the shovel of his own arrogance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Jessica testified against him, painting him as the mastermind, and herself as a manipulated victim, a performance that earned her probation and earned Derek pure hatred from the jury. Greg Harrison testified, claiming incompetence, which ruined his career, but saved him from jail time. In the end, it took the jury less than 2 hours to deliberate. Guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Derek looked back at the gallery one last time. He was looking for Serena. He didn't know what he wanted. Forgiveness. Acknowledgement. But she was already gone. She had left the moment the jury went into deliberation. She didn't stay for the victory lap. She didn't need to see him in handcuffs again. She had already moved on. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed. Serena stood on the steps, flanked by her father and Julian Croft. The wind caught her hair, making her look like a warrior. Ms. Sterling. Ms. Sterling. How do you feel? A reporter shouted. Do you feel like justice was served? Serena stepped up to the microphone. She looked into the cameras, knowing that somewhere in a holding cell with a TV, Derek was watching. Justice isn't a feeling, she said. It's a balance sheet. Today the debt was paid. She turned and walked down the steps toward the waiting black SUV. A young woman, a waitress from a local cafe, who had been following the trial, called out from the crowd. Serena. What are you going to do now? Serena stopped. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. I'm going to run my company, she said, and I'm going to make sure that people like Derek Caldwell never win again. She got into the car. As the door closed, blocking out the noise of the world, Arthur Sterling patted her hand. You did good, kid, he said. Are you okay? Serena looked out the window at the city skyline, a skyline her family had helped build and one that Derek had tried to steal. I'm better than okay, Dad, she said. I'm free. 5 years later, the heavy iron doors of the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury shut with a clang that vibrated in Derek Caldwell's teeth. It was a sound he had heard every day for 1,825 days. Derek was no longer the man who wore Italian silk suits and drank Cristal on rooftops, the man who pushed a mop bucket down the linoleum hallway of C Block was gaunt, graying, and wore a faded beige jumpsuit with the number 89402 stenciled on the breast pocket. The arrogance that had once fueled his stride was gone, replaced by a permanent stoop, the posture of a man who spent his days looking at the floor to avoid eye contact with the wrong people. Caldwell. Move it, a guard shouted from the checkpoint. Yes, sir, Derek mumbled, picking up his pace. He wasn't Derek Caldwell, CEO, anymore. Here he was, just the suit. That was the nickname the other inmates had given him, a mocking reminder of the white-collar criminal who had walked in thinking he was better than the drug dealers and thieves, only to realize that in prison, a fraudster is the lowest rung on the ladder. At least the thieves had courage. Derek had only had lies. It was recreation hour, the one time a day Derek could feel semblance of humanity. He shuffled into the common room, a bleak space with bolted-down tables and a flickering television mounted high on the wall, caged in steel mesh. Usually the TV was tuned to sports or mindless game shows. But today the room was quiet. A group of inmates were gathered around the screen watching the news. "Hey, suit," a large man named Miller grunted, pointing a tattooed finger at the screen. "Ain't that your ex?" Derek froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, a phantom rhythm of his old life. He dropped his mop and walked slowly toward the television. On the screen, CNN was broadcasting live from the steps of a gleaming new skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. The headline chyron read, "Sterling Global unveils the Phoenix Center, a new era for affordable housing." And there she was, Serena. She looked older, but in the way a statue looks older, more defined, more permanent. She was wearing a white coat, pristine and sharp, standing next to the mayor and her father, Arthur Sterling. But Serena wasn't in her father's shadow anymore. She was standing a step ahead of him. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Miss Sterling, this project was built on the site of the failed Skyline development, which was mired in scandal 5 years ago. What does this opening represent to you?" Derek gripped the back of a plastic chair, his knuckles turning white. The Skyline project. His project. The one he had tried to embezzle from. The one he had dreamed would make him a king. Serena looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were piercing, intelligent, and completely devoid of the fear he used to see in them. The Skyline project failed because it was built on greed. Serena said, her voice tinny through the prison speakers, but still commanding. It was designed to exclude people to create a fortress for the wealthy, while pushing the community out. The Phoenix Center is the opposite. It is built on transparency. It is built for the people who serve our coffee, who clean our offices, who drive our buses, the people who are often invisible but who actually run this city. She paused, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. "I spent 10 years being invisible," she continued. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I know what it feels like to have someone look right through you because they don't think you have value. This building is a promise no one is invisible anymore." The crowd on the television cheered. Derek felt a lump form in his throat, hot and suffocating. "She burned you, man." Miller laughed, slapping Derek on the back, hard enough to make him stumble. "She took your hole in the ground and built a castle on it." Derek stared at the screen. He remembered the nights he had come home late, drunk, and smelling of another woman's perfume, and ignored Serena as she sat on the couch reading a book. He remembered how he had laughed at her when she suggested he pay his workers more. He remembered calling her a doormat. He realized now with a clarity that cut like a knife that she hadn't been a doormat. She had been a trap door. And he had walked right over her until he fell through. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the applause died down as Serena stepped off the podium. The air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and expensive decatering. "Excellent speech, Serena," Arthur Sterling said, placing a hand on her shoulder. He looked frail now, leaning heavily on a cane. The last 5 years had been hard on his health, and he had officially handed the reins of Sterling Global over to her 6 months ago. "Thanks, Dad," Serena said, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. She didn't drink alcohol anymore. She liked to keep her mind sharp. "You know," Arthur said, lowering his voice, "I received a letter from the warden at Danbury yesterday." Serena stiffened slightly, but her face remained impassive. "Oh, parole hearing is coming up in 6 months, Arthur said, watching her carefully. "Derek is eligible. They wanted to know if you wanted to make a statement opposing it." Serena looked out at the city. She saw the reflection of the clouds in the glass of the new building. She thought about the anger that had fueled her for so long, the white-hot rage that had driven her to gather evidence, to wear a wire, to destroy the man she had once thought she loved. But as she searched her heart now, she didn't find anger. She found nothing. The space Derek had occupied in her mind was empty. It had been filled with new things: business deals, charity work, late nights playing chess with her father, and a new relationship with a man who was a pediatric surgeon, a man who asked her how her day was, and actually listened to the answer. "No," Serena said softly. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "No. You don't want to block it." "Let him out," Serena said, turning to her father with a calm smile. "Keeping him in prison gives him importance. It makes him a martyr in his own mind. If he stays in there, he can tell himself he's a dangerous man that the Sterlings are afraid of." She took a sip of her water. "Let him out. Let him walk these streets. Let him see my name on the buildings. Let him try to get a job with a felony record and no references. Let him realize that he isn't a villain in my story anymore. He's just a footnote." Arthur chuckled a dry, raspy sound. "You're colder than I ever was, kid." "I learned from the best," she winked. 6 months later, the bus from Danbury dropped Derek off at the Port Authority terminal in New York City. He had a plastic bag with his personal effects, a toothbrush, a change of clothes, and $40 in cash. The city was loud. It was chaotic. It didn't care that he was back. Derek walked out onto 8th Avenue. He stopped at a newsstand. He saw a magazine on the rack, Forbes. On the cover was Serena. She was sitting at a chessboard, looking regal and formidable. The headline read, "The Queen's Gambit: How Serena Sterling Checkmated the Old Boys Club and Doubled Sterling Global's Profits." Derek stared at the image. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the glossy paper, but then he saw his own reflection in the newsstand window. He looked old. He looked taut. He looked like exactly what he was, a loser. "Hey, buddy, you buying that, or just staring?" the vendor barked. Derek pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. "Just just looking." He turned away and began to walk down the street. He didn't know where he was going. He had no home. He had no friends. Jessica had moved to Europe years ago and changed her name. Greg Harrison was managing a Cinnabon in New Jersey. Derek Caldwell was free. But as he merged into the faceless crowd of the city he once thought he owned, he realized the ultimate punishment wasn't the cage. It was the irrelevance. He passed a construction site. Men were shouting, cranes were lifting steel beams. A young foreman was barking orders, looking arrogant, looking hungry. For a second, Derek wanted to stop him. He wanted to grab the young man by the shoulders and shake him. He wanted to say, "Don't do it. Don't think you're smarter than everyone else. Don't underestimate the quiet ones." But he didn't. He kept walking, head down, disappearing into the grey mist of the city, while high above him in a penthouse office that touched the clouds, Serena Sterling made her next move on the board, playing a game he never even realized he was losing until the very end. Wow. Talk about a fall from grace. Derek thought he was the king of the world, playing checkers, while Serena was mastering 4D chess. It just goes to show that you should never mistake someone's silence for ignorance or their kindness for weakness. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one who listens the most and speaks the least. Serena didn't just win the divorce. She reclaimed her entire identity and built an empire on the very ground Derek tried to steal. What did you think of Serena's revenge? Did Derek deserve to rot in prison? Or was his life of total irrelevance a better punishment? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hidden identities and ultimate karmic justice, please smash that like button. Share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.